off every part of the clean energy transition that Joe Biden had set in motion. But he also, yesterday we learned, they've canceled the lease on the building at 110th and Broadway, where Jim Hansen and the Goddard Institute of Space Science figured out that the planet was warming. And they seem to be trying to shut down the CO2 monitor on the slope of Mauna Loa. These are the two most important addresses in global warming history. One is the place where we first understood that carbon was accumulating in the atmosphere. The Keeling curve is the most important scientific diagram in history. And the other is the place where we really pieced together what that meant. I've been to both of them. I spent a fair amount of time with Jim Hansen in the 1980s up there on the fourth and fifth floor, surrounded by mainframe computers that looked like those old ones in the movies with the whirring, big circular disk drives and things, tape drives. And I got to say, there's just something. The desire of these guys not only to wreck what's going on, but to wreck our history at the same time is truly, truly sad. The only good news is they're such idiots that they've overreached so spectacularly that already 100 days in, I think the country has decided that we're sick of them. And certainly they did us an extraordinary favor by making sure that our friends to the north elected the guy I think is going to be one of the most important climate leaders in the world, Mark Carney, to be prime minister last night in Canada. Let us hope that that's an augury of what's going to happen around the world and in a year and a half's time in our own midterm elections, and that this will have turned out to have been a hideous, hideous nightmare that damaged lots and lots of people, but that we eventually woke up from, not a 100-year spell that they're able to cast over us all.
Well, Bill, you wrote about that today in your Crucial Year Substack. And for those of you who don't follow Bill on his Substack, sign up immediately. It's amazing. He writes about all the most important things in our climate movement, including the subject of the new Canadian leader surprise election that's clearly a response to Trump. Bill, I was wondering, though, pivoting a bit, can you tell us what's going on in this photograph that we're going to show everyone right now? This is from Boston last week, and just narrate what this is.
Absolutely. Now that is the wonderful, wonderful mayor of the city of Boston, Michelle Wu, who, if you don't know about Michelle Wu, you should, because in a country that gets itself back on track, she is going to be president of the United States. She is the smartest and kindest public official I've almost ever met. And if you go on YouTube, you can find video of her from last year at 7 months pregnant, playing Rhapsody in Blue with the Boston Symphony Orchestra without a score for 25 minutes and doing an unbelievable job. So contrast and compare with the oaf that we currently have occupying the Oval Office, and you start to wonder whether we're just, I don't know. I mean, what timeline? We could be in a different timeline, and maybe we will be. At any rate, there she is. And if you look behind her in the sky, you can see the steeple of Old North Church. And you can see that the steeple, which of course is where Paul Revere hung the lanterns that, or people hung the lanterns that signaled Paul Revere to begin his midnight ride to Lexington and Concord and launch the first real effective stand against colonialism and imperialism in this world. You can see that it's glowing green because the mayor just minutes before had pushed a button from the pulpit of the church that lit up a green solar-powered lantern up there in the steeple. And that was the kickoff moment for what's going to be a kind of 5-month push to Sun Day, September 21st in the fall equinox, when we're going to have a big day across America to celebrate renewable energy. We're going to have to play a lot of defense against Trump, obviously, but we got to play some offense too. And the place to play it is right around renewable energy, because that's where these guys are deeply, deeply vulnerable right now.
And we're going
And
to
I
put a
should add,
link.
you can go to sunday.earth. I'm sure you were going to do that anyway, but go to sunday.earth and you can start figuring out how to help out. And you'll also be amazed and overpowered by the sheer beauty of the website and of the logo for Sunday and everything else.
Yeah, we've just posted that link in the chat. I'm excited. Bill, it's only people like me who've been in this movement a long time who remember Step It Up 1, Step It
Yes.
Up 2, 10, 10, 10,
Yes.
all of the great campaigns that you and a lot
Well,
of other activists have kicked
we
off over the
know
year.
we know that if there we have to worry about some parts of the country figuring out what we're going to do, but we know that across Washington and Maryland and Virginia and your part of the world, we don't have to worry at all, because CCAN, the greatest regional climate action operation on the planet, will rise to the occasion and figure out some beautiful, dramatic, and hard-hitting things to get the message across that day. But they're going to be, across the country, EV and e-bike parades and concerts and people giving tours of their heat pumps, open houses, and teach-ins about where we stand. And if we do our job right, Mike, at the end of it, we'll stop talking about sun and wind as alternative energy, the way that we've been talking about them for, well, as long as I can remember. Because that's, at this point, incorrect and self-defeating. These things are not the Whole Foods of energy anymore. These are the Costco of energy. This stuff is cheap, available in bulk, on the shelf, ready to go, and we've got to make that case, because the only serious, scalable solution to climate change that we have is the rapid, rapid transition to renewable energy.
And Bill, I know we were knocking on doors in Pennsylvania in the fall, and you were telling me about a book that you're working on. I assume
Mm,
it's still in the works about solar energy, and I know it's related to Sunday. Tell us more about why you are so passionate. You've always been passionate about solar energy, but it's next level now. What
mm.
makes it next level? What are you writing about?
Right. The book will be actually is done, and it'll be out in August. And it's called, with apologies to George Harrison, Here Comes the Sun. And it's really about the incredible moment that we're in right now. Look, sometime 3 or 4 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to produce energy from the sun and the wind than it did to burn coal and gas and oil. We now live on a planet where the cheapest way to make power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is one of the most remarkable moments in human history, at least as interesting as the moment when we learned to burn coal and gas and oil. It offers us the extraordinary chance to very quickly change the trajectory that we're on toward wrecking the planet. It allows us to stop filling the lungs of people around the world with particulates from burning stuff. And it allows us to free ourselves from the idiots who own big oil wells and coal mines, all of whom can't be trusted with the power that comes from that, whether they're Vladimir Putin or the Koch brothers or the King of Saudi Arabia or Joe Manchin or whoever it is. Okay. And instead, we have the ability to power now the world with sun and wind that are available absolutely everywhere. It sounded until a few years ago like something that we would hope to get to someday. But now, in the places where we've really done it, we're seeing the results suddenly and startlingly fast. I've just been looking at the numbers with Mark Jacobson for California this year. California has done more than any place in the country to build out its renewable energy resource. And as a result, day after day now, California, for long stretches of the day, produces more than 100% of its electricity from renewable sources, which means that at night, when the sun goes down, batteries that have been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon become the biggest source of supply to the grid. As a result, California, and this just really demonstrates the tipping point that we're crossing over as we speak. California this spring is using 44% less natural gas to generate electricity than it did 2 years ago. That's the single most optimistic number I've heard in 40 years of working on the climate crisis. And it's not confined to California. Texas, at least until the legislature gets in the way, is at the moment putting up clean energy faster even than California. And of course, the US is miles and miles behind China, where about 2/3 of all the clean energy is being built. China's not a petro state. China's the world's first electro state. And in fact, coal combustion went down in the first quarter of the year in China to generate power 5% year over year. That's a landmark moment to top that peak and start heading down the other side. The IEA says that we need to increase the pace that we're doing renewable energy by about 50% to be on a kind of real Paris pathway. That won't be easy, but it's not incomprehensible. I mean, if you look around Maryland or Virginia and think, could we be doing this 50% faster? Yeah, sure. It just takes some good policy and some push, and the kind of stuff you guys are good at providing. One of the things we need to do is just make it easier everywhere to do utility scale solar, force the utilities to open up the grid and start interconnecting projects. And even easier on rooftop solar. I mean, in this country, it costs 3 times as much to put it up as it does in Australia or the EU, just because there's all these permits that you need to go get. And it takes forever, and inspectors out and, cost of capital and on and on and on. None of that's necessary. The Australians have figured out how to, self-permit inspectors. That I think in Maryland now they're using that software from the DOE that allows for all but automatic, all but immediate approval of new solar stuff. We need to do that across the country.
I cannot wait to read Here Comes the Sun in August. I cannot wait for Sunday to come in September. CCAM will be there absolutely in full force, no doubt about it. Bill, the urgency of making that transition fully to solar and batteries and wind and electric cars, electrifying the whole world. When I first started in this movement in 2002, our goal was always to, we knew we couldn't stop climate change completely, but the idea was to transition to clean energy fast enough that we avoided the worst impacts of global warming. We always tack that on to the sentence. We're going to push sufficiently to, mitigate the worst outcomes of climate change, however you want to phrase it. But it really does feel that those worst impacts are happening. I just wrote a book about the impacts of climate change on my block, which I'll talk about here in a second. But Bill, tell us, you've lived in the Adirondacks and now Vermont for quite a few years. What are some of the impacts that you've seen of climate change where you live?
Well, look, we're supposed to be kind of a climate refuge. That's what people used to say, the same way they said it about Asheville, but not true. We've now had in our small town two of the last 3 summers, our town's been cut off from the world for days because the river flooding took out the highway both east and west, and a 2-lane road that connects us to the world. And Vermont's had, just hideous flooding, washed out bridges everywhere, roads everywhere. What we'll do, the next time it happens, especially if there's no FEMA to help, I actually have no idea. We're on the precipice of real disintegration. And of course, we have it far easier than most places. I was watching, because of the flooding here in Vermont, I think I was paying particular attention to flooding in 2023. And the week that our huge rains finally ended, they began in North Africa. And before the month was out, the biggest river in Libya had swollen to the point where it bust through two dams and then crashed into a coastal city and washed 10,000 people out to sea where they drowned in an hour, you know. That's the kind of thing that happens now on a pretty regular basis, uh, uh, and happens um, to people who did absolutely nothing to cause the crisis that's now swallowing them up. So yeah, we're not getting out of this hole. I think the way to phrase it now is we want to see if we can stop this short of the place where it just cuts civilization off right at the knees. Um, so that seems like a good moment to turn to this new book of yours, which is really the reason that we're here tonight. It's a beautiful book, which I got to read in advance and enjoyed immensely. Um, Tell us, give us a concise summary of how you describe it. You've been having to work the elevator pitch so you can talk to people at bookstores and things. What do you say?
Well, I say that in 2022, Bill and I and a lot of other activists celebrated the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, the strongest climate bill passed by any government anywhere in the world, parts of which we hope will survive this Trump administration. But when that bill passed in September of 2022, I should have been happy. But I finally looked around my own neighborhood and realized that almost all the really big oak trees that make Tacoma Park, Maryland famous had died or were in the process of dying. And I was deeply affected by it. I went through a period of sadness. I began interviewing arborists and entomologists and tree care companies like, why is this happening? I had caught fragments of news about, in my city newsletter and elsewhere, there was a beetle problem, there was extreme rain, but I wound up doing the deep research, and it's not me saying it's climate change, it's all these experts that were saying it. And I realized then in the fall of 2022 that I had been living on this same street for 30 years. And in normal times, if you live in the same place for 30 years, you're going to see change, right? You're going to see clothing fashion change, you're going to see babies born, other people leave. But in our period of climate change, you also see climate change happening. And so that's what I was seeing. I was seeing climate impacts in the form of our really big trees can no longer survive in this region that I live in. One arborist told me our native trees are no longer native in the mid-Atlantic. They're foreigners now because we've changed the climate. We've changed the climate, so we shouldn't be expected that they get sick and dying. And
Is it
the
is it drought stress that's killing them? Insect infestation? Some combination of all?
Well, we read about these climate events in California, a year of record wildfires, or the Caribbean, where half the coral reef bleaches in 1 year. In the mid-Atlantic, our big climate event was actually the rains of 2018. We got so much rain in 2018, it shattered records for every state in the mid-Atlantic. What happened is the jet stream, that pattern of wind from west to east caused by the temperature differential between the Arctic and the mid-latitudes, as the Arctic warms so much, that jet stream is dipping and wobbling. And in 2018, it dipped all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, brought all this moisture up to the mid-Atlantic and dumped it in a series of atmospheric rivers. And that rain soaked the soil throughout this region. I mean, Maryland got 2.5 feet more rain than normal for the annual basis. West Virginia, New Jersey, the Carolinas, all records to this day. That rainfall soaked the soil in this region so thoroughly that it triggered a normally latent mold called Phytophthora, which translates from Greek to plant destroyer. And that mold decimated the root systems of so many of our older oak trees, so that when they leafed out in 2019, they were so stressed they had to borrow energy from their trunks, from their own bodies, their own core, which is a very stressful process that trees are adapted to do occasionally. but that stressful process actually draws ambrosia beetles. It puts off a gas, ethanol. The ambrosia beetles are like hound dogs, and they began to attack. So we lost a huge wave of old oaks in the mid-Atlantic in 2019, 2020, 2021 from the rains of 2018. That has been our shocking, really conspicuous climate event in this region. And then you add record windstorms that we've had, other droughts. We get these really sharp droughts interspersed between rain. So I wound up writing this book about the plausible impacts of climate change on my block, not just the trees though, but Lyme disease. Lyme disease is rampant in my neighborhood. I've struggled with chronic Lyme disease for over a decade. Our warmer winters don't kill off the ticks. And I also believe that there's the connection between trees and human health. We all know about forest bathing. We know that there's all kinds of studies showing that people around trees have better health, their immune systems are boosted, their cortisol levels, their stress levels go down. Patients in hospitals who can just see a tree through a window recover faster than patients who can't. So if you combine the trees disappearing, Lyme disease, young people on my block in my neighborhood who've decided not to have children, it's all of that I write about, but it's not just the negative stuff. The subtitle has the word hope in it. And that's because at the same time that we've seen the passing of trees in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and throughout the mid-Atlantic, we've seen the coming of clean energy. We really have. We see the electric cars. My friend Paula calls it the faint harmony of angels of those electric cars coming down the street. We have the first gas station in America, RS Automotive in Tacoma Park, that went from pumping gas for gas-powered cars to only charging electric cars. And solar, when big trees come down in my neighborhood and that sunlight suddenly is there that wasn't there for a century, one of two things happen. The solar panels go up on people's roofs or gardens happen. So this is the mix that I write about in the book. And the basic premise of the book is that climate change has gotten so severe around the world that you can take a spinning lacquered globe and throw a dart at that globe, and wherever that dart lands, anywhere in the world, you can write a whole book about that one microdot and the climate impacts. And the reason I know that is I've done it with this book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right. We're still, and the scary part of that, of course, is that we're still probably nearer the beginning than the end of this saga. We've now raised the temperature about 1.6 degrees Celsius globally average, but we're clearly on a path for 3 degrees Celsius if we don't make some very major changes very fast. And that won't be twice as bad. That'll take us past a number of tipping points where the damage will be exponential. So tell us a little bit about this idea of negative emissions and how that features into this.
Well, since 2014, our best climate scientists at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have been talking about negative emissions. They've been saying, look, we've waited so long to switch to clean energy that decarbonizing the economy alone isn't going to save us in time from the amount of carbon that's already banked in the atmosphere. Bill, you more than almost anyone on the planet has warned us all that the only safe level of CO2 in the atmosphere is 350 parts per million CO2. That's what scientists have been telling us for quite a while. Well, today we're at 425 parts per million CO2 and still rising rapidly. And the transition to clean energy is unstoppable. Bill, you know that. I know that. We're putting in a gigawatt of solar energy every day around the world. That's like a giant nuclear power plant of solar every day. Half of all cars sold in the largest automobile market in the world this year, China, will be either plug-in hybrid electric cars or fully electric cars. Australia, known for its coal, will be close to 100% clean carbon-free grid by 2030. This is all happening. Trump can't stop it. Then we have the blue states in America, California, you talked about, Bill, New England, Maryland. Trump can't stop that. He could slow down some things, but he can't stop this clean energy revolution. But the problem is we're in overshoot, right? We've overshot the safe level of CO2, 350. And so scientists are talking about it's not enough to just stop emitting carbon and switching to clean energy. We have to somehow have negative emissions. We have to pull some of the carbon out of the atmosphere and somehow store it underground or in other ways. So I talk about one of my neighbors. Again, this is a hyper local book, the Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, about mostly my one block on Willow Avenue, but surrounding blocks in the very interesting characters that I meet, including my neighbor, Dr. Ning Zhang, who's a climate scientist at the University of Maryland. Ning has this idea of taking all these trees that are dying, because a lot of us are noticing so many of our big trees are dying. And they have sequestered carbon for 50, 100, 150 years. Ning is terrified that these trees are going to decompose. Even if you put it in a landfill, they decompose over time. God forbid you wood chip them, then they decompose even faster. You put them in a trash incinerator, even faster still. So to prevent their carbon that's been stored for so long from venting into the atmosphere, he has this idea of burying these trees, of creating wood vaults, he calls them, but they're just just burying them. And if you do it in low oxygen clay, you can arrest that decomposition for 1,000 years or more. He calls it reverse coal. So he enters the narrative of this book as we're all grieving these tree stumps, these big trees that died. One arborist told me, when a tree dies in a national forest, it's a number, it's a statistic. When it dies in your backyard, it's a friend. And in Tacoma Park, we've lost so many dear friends, these old trees that are still there. I'll show you some photographs in a
Oh,
second of these massive tree
I'll
stumps.
just interrupt to say my backyard that you can see out there is the national forest, and we care about them when they die in the national forest too. And
They're friends, no doubt. But Ning Zheng in this book is, as we're grieving these trees, as they're disappearing, he shows up as an Undertaker character. And I follow him for a year, the year 2023, the calendar year of 2023, which turned out to be the warmest year on record, surpassing 2016, but then it was surpassed by 2024. But most of my book is set in the calendar year of 2023. And I follow Ning Zhang, this quixotic climate scientist who wants to bury trees. And he takes me on this incredible odyssey, shows me where trees are piling up outside of Baltimore in these massive boneyards. And then he finally negotiates with a farmer outside of Baltimore. We have a burial. He buries the first 100 tons of trees in clay soil. He reads a poem. We have a moment of silence. He thanks the trees. And now he wants to bury billions of tons of trees as they die from climate change around the world as a way to achieve these negative emissions.
truly scalable, do you think?
I don't know. He thinks so, especially if you can bury them near where they fell. I think it could contribute. I do think that, at least in my region, a lot of our local municipalities don't want these trees going into landfills. They're trying to reduce the amount of stuff going into landfills. They don't want to incinerate them. It's fascinating because so many trees have died. In my neighborhood alone, since 2018, we've lost 45 acres of tree canopy in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is a
Wow.
pretty small little city.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and there's the wood chip market, the landscapers have no need for it.
Yeah,
Every
of course.
playground's been blanketed. And
Yeah.
so but Ning has this idea that it could be part of the contribution.
Mike, beyond that, I mean, you've thought for 20 years or maybe more, because I can remember talking with you about it then, that we may reach the point where geoengineering becomes a necessary supplement to everything else we're doing. How's that looking to you as we head into the next few years?
Well, so we've got clean energy. That revolution's unstoppable, but it's going to take a few more decades, so we're not there yet. We have negative emissions. We have people like Ning who have ideas like burying trees. There are other ideas of building these giant machines with fans and filters that can suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and store it underground, but they use ginormous amounts of energy. They're not ready for prime time. There's weatherizing rocks. You can bust up, for example, basalt, and as more of its surface is exposed to air, it binds with carbon. Then maybe use that for fertilizer. But the right question is it scalable? I mean, these ideas are not ready. They're expensive. I asked Ning Zhang in the book, my book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue. I said, Ning, you know what you're doing and what others are doing for negative emissions. It seems like where solar was in the 1990s in terms of its evolvement. And he said, no, you're wrong. It's where solar was in the 1970s. You know, that's where negative emissions are. So if clean energy alone is not going to save us, negative emissions technology is where solar was in the 1970s, then what else? And you mentioned James Hansen, formerly of NASA Goddard. He's had this idea for a while that we need to research, not necessarily deploy, but at least research, do the computer modeling, do some of the testing of ways to reflect sunlight away from the planet. So I do follow that thread. I talk to scientists at NASA. The idea is sticking with the metaphor of trees on my block. As we lose these tree canopies right where we live, is it possible to create a solar canopy overhead to buy us a few decades to fully decarbonize our economy? I don't know if it's doable. There are ideas of mimicking volcanoes like Mount Pinatubo, which by itself puts so much solar reflecting sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere that by itself, this one volcano cooled the planet Earth by more than a degree Fahrenheit for more than a year. So this one volcano erased 100 years of global warming with one eruption. So the question is, could we become a human volcano? The Biden administration put out some guidelines for research on geoengineering and solar reflection methods. And they said, look, is this scary? Yes. Is it risky? Of course. But risky compared to what? And they recommend that in research, we take a risk versus risk management approach. Is geoengineering research and maybe deployment risky? Yes, compared to what though? Runaway climate change. I mean, the risk of runaway climate change. So we have to balance those two. I hope to God we never have to try to reflect sunlight on a global scale, but we should at least research it so that we can rule out the truly crazy stuff. And when the politicians, and you know, Bill, I mean, it's not unlikely that if climate change has gotten so bad that you can write a whole book about the impacts on your block, then maybe it's not that long before politicians really get panicky about this. If we start to see things like synchronized global breadbasket collapse, where
Yep.
we can't raise wheat in central China, Ukraine, Kansas, and Argentina at the same time. I mean, I don't know, we get a third of our calories from those areas worldwide. If politicians start to get panicky and just start doing all kinds of crazy stuff, it'd be great to have a body of science, have some research saying you don't want to do this. And if you do this, you have to do it slowly. Just come up with some guidelines.
Yep, I hear you. That makes I'm afraid that makes more sense with each passing month. It sets a new record for temperature. And of course, we already are a volcano. I mean, we're pouring CO2 now at 90 times the pace of volcanoes, which is the normal source of supply for CO2 to the atmosphere. We're talking about becoming, producing the other chemicals that come out the top of a volcano too. So I hear you.
Bill, I think we'll show
so
some slides real quick, Kadesh, and then we're going to take some questions. I want to again thank everyone who's joining us. Bill McKibben, of course, myself, Mike Tidwell, talking books, talking climate change, talking Trump. So this is my new book. Bill has been kind enough to put a blurb on the back of it. And it's got a starred review in Publishers Weekly. But go back to that first photograph, Kadesh. This is an example. This is the Miller family who live right across the street from me. You could see this is a 150-year-old southern red oak that finally came down in 2021 after the shock of the rains of 2018. It lasted for 2 more years, but you could just see this family grieves for this tree every day. That's Lisa and Dave Miller and their son Wesley. Next. Next slide. Yeah. So this is the crane that took down the Miller tree. This crane was 5 stories tall, weighed 10 tons, nearly crushed their driveway. They had to take down utility lines and it blocked the street for 2 days. These are the kind of trees that we're losing in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Next. This is a very common scene in my neighborhood, men working in trees. That White House at the corner of my street, Willow and Tulip, if you'd taken that photograph 5 years ago, you would not have been able to see that house completely surrounded by century-old oak trees. Next. Flooding. Bill, you talk about flooding in Vermont. We've had unbelievable flooding in Tacoma Park. September 10, 2020, this photograph was taken. We got 5 inches of rain in 1 hour. We're old trolley suburb of Washington, D.C., right on the border with Washington. And this flooded just uncountable number of houses, flooded my church. Leaked into our basement preschool at my church, destroyed our boilers. Very bad flood. Next. Um, this is would otherwise be an unremarkable photograph, but this is my church, Tacoma Park Presbyterian. It's 1 block from my house. We're not only getting the bigger precipitation patterns, but as the trees die, as the really big trees in my neighborhood die, we're starting to see in a single square block the cascading impacts of climate change, because those trees are the number one thing that protect us from flooding. Those roots absorb the rain. That billion leaves use friction to slow down the rain from falling. And as they disappear in the backyards of Willow Avenue, my street, that rain just washes toward my street. And after the flood of 2020, church leaders went to the city and said, you got to do something about this. You got to stop this rain, these flood from coming into our church. We've got a preschool here. And the city of Tacoma Park said, look, we're dealing with this kind of thing all over the city. We don't have the money. We're out of flood money. We've already spent our $500,000 a year on flood money. But they said, we do have sidewalk money. So the city of Tacoma Park used $45,000 worth of taxpayer money, busted up a completely good sidewalk, brought in 30 tons of soil, elevated that sidewalk 14 inches, and created a flood berm, which is what you're looking at here. This is a berm, a flood berm to protect my church from flooding. It's climate adaptation. It's expensive. It's scary. It's brought on by disappearing trees and bigger precipitation events. And again, I'm writing about cascading impacts of climate change in 1 square block. Next. This is a boneyard of dying trees. So many trees are dying in the mid-Atlantic. This is where they go from public land in Baltimore. Baltimore has a policy of not sending dead trees to the landfill or incinerating them, and they send them to this transfer station called Camp Small. And since 2019, more and more trees are coming. They can't wood chip them enough. There's not enough landscapers that want it. The specialty lumber market can't make a use of it. These are urban trees that don't grow especially straight. And so they're just piling up. And this is where Ning Zhang, the climate scientist from University of Maryland, took me here in February of 2023. And he told these folks at this tree yard, let me bury these trees for you. And they were like, hallelujah. And so this is climate change in my region. This is what's happening with our mass tree mortality. Next. And this is Ning at Camp Small. He's standing on this. You can't tell how tall it is. It's a massive mountain of mulch from shredded trees, and those are some of the dying trees from climate change in the background. And that's him. When we went that day, him telling me about his vision of burying trees. Next. This is a beautiful pin oak in my backyard. It's a character in my book. It's about 70 years old. It survives the rain pretty well, but it doesn't do well with droughts. And we've had really sharp droughts in between really freakish rains in Tacoma Park. When it gets dry, it starts to drop limbs, and it's our friend, it's our family member, and we live every day wondering how much longer it can hang on. 2023, I spent one calendar year. The first two chapters of my book are the history of Tacoma Park, the history of climate change in Tacoma Park, and my history as a climate activist. Those are the first two chapters. Chapters 3 through 12 are climate change on my block in the year 2023, from January to December. These are daffodils blooming on January 15th in Tacoma Park, Maryland. We had the third warmest winter in the history of Tacoma Park. Next. We all remember the Canadian wildfires. They came in 2023. This is my office, seventh floor office of CCAN in Tacoma Park. This was in June of 2023. Normally outside my office window right there, you would be able to see the Washington Monument in the distance and the National Cathedral from this same shot. Instead, you can barely see 4 blocks. That was from dying trees in eastern Canada, the smoke coming to us in the mid-Atlantic, where we breathed in the remains of these trees, and just an ultimate climate tragedy. Again, 2023 in my neighborhood, we had the worst windstorm we'd had in more than a decade that caused lots and lots of damage. We lost some massive trees that summer of 2023. This is December 2023, and I'm taking a photograph of the backyards on the northwestern side of my block, Willow Avenue. It was December, and we were in the final phases of the longest snow drought in the history of Washington, D.C. We went 660 days without measurable snowfall. But also, this photograph right here, had you taken this photograph 5 years earlier, you would have seen a climax urban forest canopy. You would have seen in the foreground a 150-year-old willow oak, a 100-year-old white oak, an 80-year-old willow oak, and a 150-year-old southern red oak, all within that one frame. They're all gone. And again, it's not me saying it's climate change, it's the city arborists and tree experts. Next. But that's the downer part. The good news, again, I talked about the electric vehicle charging station, first of its kind. This is Depeshwar Doli, who decided to switch from gas to electric cars, influenced by his daughter Teresa, who is named after Mother Teresa. Great story there that I tell in the book. Offshore wind power. This is Lord Charkoudian, the great Maryland climate hawk lawmaker. We go out and visit these offshore wind turbines off the coast of Virginia Beach. They're being built as we speak. It's unlikely Donald Trump can stop this wind farm, 800-foot tall turbines. When it's done, this one wind farm will take the equivalent of 1 million cars off the road. When trees go down in my neighborhood, again, one of two things happen. Solar goes up or gardens happen. This is my neighbor Dorothy, a midwife who built a geothermal heating system in her backyard. We planted a garden right on the block, right where this tree was, to honor this tree. Planted a new tree as well, but we hope to get 10 years of sustainable gardening right on this block. Ning Zhang talking to a farmer, Bill Kilby, where he wants to bury the first 100 tons of trees in his plan to create negative emissions. That's a farm north of Baltimore. And this is the burial, November 2023. Again, in this calendar year, I follow Ning as he cuts through bureaucratic red tape, negotiates with a farmer, rents these trucks like hearses to transport these trees to a farm, and then he buries these trees, and we have a ceremony and he reads a poem. This is December 2023. We're planting a swamp white oak because the city of Tacoma Park, as part of climate adaptation, is recommending swamp white oaks and other trees that are really good with rainfall. So this is climate adaptation in December 2023. And this finally is the most beautiful tree in my neighborhood. It's a post oak. It's easily 1.5 centuries old. I can see it from my front yard. It's well adapted to floods and droughts, but we live every day in concern that how long will it last, these giants, since they're falling at such a record pace. And that's it. Thank you. Most of you have already gotten at the price of admission tonight. You did acquire a signed copy of this book. Thank you for your donation. Thank you for all your donations. And Bill, if you're able to stick around one more minute, let's take a couple of questions. And I want to really thank everyone for listening to this conversation, looking at those photographs. Bill, here's a question. Can you talk about the need for rare earth minerals for solar battery storage and or solar panels? Is there a reason for us to be concerned there? Is there a trade-off? And what about the geopolitics of that?
Yeah, good question, Mary. Look, yeah, there's no free lunch, and we're going to have to mine some stuff in order to do what we need to do to build out renewable energy. The question is how much stuff, and the answer there is way less stuff than we do at the moment. And if you think about it for a minute, it becomes clear why. You mine some rare earth minerals, or you mine some lithium, and you put them in your wind turbine or your battery, and then they work for the next quarter century. And then when you're done, you can almost always recycle them and get them back and start over again. Contrast that with mining coal, where you mine it and then you set it on fire, and then you have to go mine some more the next day. That's why the Rocky Mountain Institute this year estimated that all the mining for the renewable battery transition between now and 2050 would require less volume than the volume of coal we mined last year on this planet. So, one way to think about this is if you fill up a ship with solar panels and send it over here, you're getting roughly 500 times as much energy out of it as if you fill up a ship with oil and send it somewhere. So you begin to sense some of the trade-offs in terms of dematerialization that we're getting. So I think in this case, the trade-offs work in our favor, even if we didn't have to do this in order to preserve the planet's climate system anyway.
Yeah,
I see there's a question from my beloved colleague Nancy LaPlaca, wanting to know what the big issues for CCAN are this coming year.
Well, first of all, thanks for coming, Nancy, and for that question. We are, oh my gosh, and Bill, you know that we are part of a national movement to try to hold polluters accountable for their turning the atmosphere into a Superfund site. So we have a bill we just passed in Maryland that is a beginning process of assessing billions of dollars in fees to some of the world's biggest oil companies. That bill has passed. And Vermont, your state bill, was the first to pass a climate Superfund bill. It's now tied up in court. We expect we're going to win, and we appreciate y'all's leadership on that. New York has passed a similar bill. There are lots of states that are working on this. We're going to try to pass a similar bill again to using Superfund type laws saying, look, you created a mess. Oil companies, we know you did. We can verify it. Now you need to help us adapt to this climate impact. These climate change. You need to pay for the air conditioners, pay for the flood berms, like in my church. And it's billions and billions of dollars, a la tobacco or opioids. We're going to try to pass a similar bill in DC and a similar bill in Virginia. We're fighting utilities. The gas companies want to dig up all the pipelines, whether they need it or not, and replace them as a capital cost, fleecing ratepayers in Maryland and DC, when in fact we should be getting off gas completely. We should be using linked geothermal systems. So we're fighting the utilities who want to lock us in to gas infrastructure for decades to come, instead of engaging in good faith and getting off gas completely. So lots of other issues. You can go to ChesapeakeClimate.org or CCANActionFund.org and learn more about what we're doing. And I think we'll take one more question, Bill. You've been very generous with your time. One person did ask, when you bury trees on farmland, does that in any way disrupt a farmer's ability to grow crops? And it does not. I mean, Ning Zhang is especially looking for marginal soils that aren't very productive, that are high clay content. He's created a map of these kind of soils throughout the region. And You take the topsoil off, you put it off to the side, you bury the trees, you put the topsoil back on. Yes, it's slightly elevated, but you can
Dude,
grow plant
dude,
pollinator.
then you put the solar panels on top, man. I mean, this
There you
is
go.
not hard
Yeah, then you have a solar park. Um,
with
uh,
some pollinator friendly plantings in between.
well,
Exactly right.
Bill, listen, thank you for joining. Thanks for blurbing my book. Again, everyone here, if you get a chance, get ready to buy Bill's new book, Here Comes the Sun, in August. I can't wait to read it. I've read every book I believe that you've written, Bill. The last one I read that I hadn't read was $100 Holiday, about how to spend $100 at Christmas, which was great. So that book's coming out in August. My book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, is out now. Tell all your friends, give it as gifts. It is a unique story that has never been told. No one's written a book about climate impacts on such a small area,
Yeah.
which, if our
This
trees are
is
becoming foreigners, so are we, and we might want to do something about it.
this is an important book, people. It really is. And what a pleasure to have gotten to talk about it tonight. Mike, thank you not only for your day job of solving this problem, but thank you for being a superb writer who describes it in just the kind of detail we need. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Bill. Take care, everyone.